So today we are here with Stephen Gyllenhaal and Michael Trout. Stephen is the founder of the Identity Development Institute and the producer for the In Utero documentary. I'll leave it to Stephen to introduce our guest and explain the connection between the In Utero documentary and the Institute because it's quite a story. So Stephen, take it away from here.
I think I'm not going to talk too much about the Institute really, um, or how I came to all of this work, except to say that we had made this film in utero, which you had seen, because my wife and I were struggling with getting pregnant. And I think as time has gone on, we've understood a lot more about why, thanks to the Institute. But it really taught me in making that film, and then since that time, how important early trauma was in my life, how much it impacted our not being able to get pregnant, and how in the process of learning ways to address it, my wife did get pregnant. We have a 7-year-old now, and I have come to believe that there's almost nothing more important than addressing these issues. And Michael, I want to now talk a little bit about Michael. So, when you Google Michael Trout, you first get number 27, the baseball player. Then you get him, the founder and director of the Infant Parent Institute, which specializes in clinical services, professional training, and research related to the optimal development of infants and their families. You learn on Google that he's published numerous book chapters and journal articles, co-authored the Jonathan Letters, Baby Verses, the narrative poetry of infants and toddlers, and produced 16 documentaries. And as a filmmaker, that's very impressive, including films from a baby's perspective on divorce, adoption, loss, domestic violence, and parental incarceration. You also get from Google that his most recent book, The Hallowed Ground, 4 Decades in Infant Mental Health, was published as an audiobook in 2019 and released in print by Cambridge scholars in 2021. What you don't learn from Google is that he is a gem, and that his writing is a mix of science, profound clinical experiences, and poetry. He sent me 3 chapters to read from The Hallowed Ground, and I cried through all 3, because they are so nuanced, counterintuitive in the best sense, and utterly embracing of the mystery of the human experience. So it's with utter delight and curiosity that I introduce Michael to myself now as the evening goes on, and to all of you. So Michael?
Well, Stephen, as most of you know, and who have seen the films, is terribly interested in prenatal psychology, as am I. But I'm a little bit of a latecomer. Only maybe the last couple of decades have I allowed myself to imagine the possibility that there is life before birth. I trained with a woman who was thought to be an incredible, ridiculous, absurd radical, particularly in the psychoanalytic world, by suggesting that there is life before 3. Because in the old days, that's about when we thought you should start paying attention to babies. So for me to go from there, wrapping myself around the idea that babies are worth knowing, that they do think and feel, and that a great deal about what they experience is carried into their future. For me to go from there to thinking about babies before they're born was a real stretch, but not an unscientific one. I'm a real skeptic, and I've really put the literature through the ringer, so to speak. And I've come to the conclusion that we are just complete fools if we don't pay attention to the basic, first of all, the basic biology, that all organisms are designed to not be stupid. They're designed to pay attention to what goes on around them and then to record as much of it as they can. Some people call that memory. Those who study only animals, non-human animals, don't call it memory. But they say when a snail remembers, so to speak, recalls an experience that he's had and demonstrates that with later behavior in the cage, that is because that snail needs to know how to survive. And each and every experience of snails and humans gives us information about how to survive optimally. So that's where my interest came.
The idea, for instance, that there's no memory before 3 years old is kind of a belief rather than science. It's very convenient for people to believe that there's nothing going on before 3 years old, and then they went back and back. You want to just speak to that a little?
You're absolutely right. This, like so many other things in medicine and psychology, are really, when you tear them apart, just beliefs. And we hold to them because it benefits us, we think, to hold them to them. If we don't want to think that there's life before birth, then, because it's really, really inconvenient when you do, by the way.
Yes.
When you start imagining that, oh my goodness, is it inconvenient? And it makes people feel potentially just awful.
Yeah.
Mothers regularly say to me, oh my gosh, you mean that near miss car accident I had at 6 months gestation, could that be what's caused my kids ADHD? And I say, well, I really can't speak to that because I don't know about cause and effect so directly. I don't think anyone does. Nor should you be fretting about it now, because there's not a thing you can do about it now. But is there a connection between what you thought and felt when you were pregnant and the things your child thinks and feels now? Maybe it's worth thinking about.
I would actually challenge that a little now, because I think there's more and more science that's proving this. And when I look at your writing and I look at what you've done, what you and the other sort of pioneers of this and the bravery it took to be considered a fool, really, for all of these things, has now increasingly been proven by neurobiology and biology. It's almost now, at least in the circles that really address science, confirmed. So that when you look at a car accident at 6 months old and the impact of it, it's almost proven from what I can see. And that's what's been so great about making a movie. I get access to anybody and everybody. And I think the other piece, which is why I don't want to go too much into this, but what the Institute has found with the help of a lot of other people is that it now can be processed. It now can be addressed. It doesn't mean you become a perfect human being, but you begin to understand what it was that makes you behave in a certain way as you grow up. And I want to kind of get into I want to sort of explore one chapter of the book, the chapter on adoption, really, which it applies for surrogacy too. There's a little bit of that, and the story of Marilyn, which I think, and what I have found, because I've already sort of made clear, as a writer, as a poet, as an artist, I love your writing, Michael, and I do feel like it is so human that I want to kind of quote sections from that chapter so we can kind of walk our way through it. But before I do that, I want to quote something else from another chapter, just briefly, to describe what I see as the way you enter into a relationship with a patient, so-called patient. And it struck me as really, really important. And it may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work. And that when we no longer know which way to go, we have come to our real journey, which I think is science, real science. And not knowing, and I think there's so much fear for so many practitioners around having to know. And so I want to sort of take that quality and enter into the story of Marilyn a little bit. And the one thing I would start with is that sense that when she walked into your office at 48 years old, she was, as you described her, affectless.
Let me tie the first meeting of her with a couple of things you just said. There is a great gift to the therapist, although not often acknowledged, to believe the way you just now described. It means that the pressure is off.
Yes.
You don't have to have all the answers for everybody as soon as they walk in the room. And in fact, the pressure is off the patient too, because now we're speaking the same language. We're on a shared discovery, and it allows the therapist to be, even if he or she isn't naturally this way, it allows the therapist to be gentle and tender and quiet and soft. And so that when somebody like Marilyn walks in the office, staring down at the floor, very agitated and very much full of denial that there's any reason whatsoever for her to be there. And it sure as the Dickens doesn't have anything to do with adoption. And I say, why did you mention that? Well, I'm adoptee, and I looked around to find out who knows about adoption in this town. And I said, so you think there might be something about that that's important? No, it has nothing to do with why I'm here. None of that matters. Nobody has to convince anybody of anything. I just hold very tenderly her assertion that nothing about her adoption mattered worth a lick. And she's just here because she stumbled in from the street as she was walking by.
You say something in one of the other chapters, which I don't want to reference too much, but it's that have respect for distraction and resistance. Have respect for that in anyone you work with.
As if it's meaningful in itself.
Yeah.
As if resistance isn't a way for a patient to make you frustrated, but is in itself part of the story.
Yeah.
Why would a person not resist knowing about something that will cause them in the knowing in the present great, great sorrow, great pain? Did Marin want to remember that her mother didn't want her? Much less that maybe, we don't know this for a fact, but maybe that her mother tried to abort her? Does she want to remember that? Of course not. So if we're going to walk there together, we better be very, very gentle together.
Yeah, yeah. And I think also this sense of, let's just go on with life. We have a whole life in front of us. Let's forget about what went on back there. Let's just be tough and strong and, move on into life and enjoy life. And of course, unfortunately, it doesn't work very well.
Oh, I think it's a great idea. It's just that, as you say, it doesn't work out very well. We will pay the piper somewhere along the line, sometimes in the case of Marilyn, not till we're almost five decades old.
So I'm going to quote something you say early on in that chapter. We're really setting up the premise. We suggest that planned adoption may put a birth mother at risk for dissociation, a kind of withdrawal from her own experience, and that such withdrawal may be experienced by the baby as maternal absence and rejection.
Yes. And if you think for just a few milliseconds about the plight of most birth mothers. No, let me erase that word plight. That makes it sound too dramatic. The situation, the circumstance of many birth mothers, maybe feeling in trouble, maybe feeling ashamed, maybe feeling worried about the condemnation of others, not sure what to do, thinking or having been convinced to think at least that relinquishing the child is the best thing, then why would we be surprised then when she wouldn't select, as a quite logical defense, just not being home, just not being present for this thing that's happening? Think about other stuff. And interestingly, when you talk to birth mothers, if once they get really honest with you, they will tell you that almost everyone in their world urged them to do exactly that. Just forget about it, honey. Just focus on your college, or focus on getting out of high school, or just think about other things.
So how slowly she evolved, not devolved, but evolved into someone who started to express her feelings. So talk about that a little.
Well, I found it one of the most clever creations I think I'd ever heard. I've heard lots of defenses, but this one struck me as incredibly poignant, first of all, but also right for a baby to have. And the image that was in her mind was simply that of a very small space. She didn't call it a box right off, but a very small space. She held out her hands like this to show me this. So I said, oh, so I didn't say this, but I thought, oh, about the size of a baby. Well, so yes. So a very small space. And you can't get out of this small space. You can't get in it. You can't get out of it. There are no windows. There are no doors. You can't see out. You can't escape. But that's not a problem, she urged me to understand when I asked about it, as if to say, gosh, that sounds scary. No, not scary at all. It's good when you're in there and nothing can get in. Nothing can get in. And I would say, but wait, if nothing can get in, what about food? She said, oh, I figured that out a long time ago. Uh, if you're in a spot where no new food can come, no new air, no new water, then you just be small.
Right.
Don't move. And you go over in the corner. And of course, as I looked up at her sitting on my couch, I saw that's exactly what she was doing on my couch at the moment, just curling herself up as small as she possibly could in the corner of the couch. That would then spell survival.
And I want to just note that one of the things about what has fascinated me and what made me create or found the Institute and grow it is the number of times in sessions that people would describe this exact experience, that they needed to be small, they needed to be tiny, which of course is a very safe way to survive if your mother doesn't want you. Be as small as I can be as little as I can be so I can keep growing. And I want to just quote another a little bit further down in that chapter. You said, she was proud of what she does in there in the box. I had to wait for a punchline. I think she saw it as so patently obvious that she surely wouldn't have to spell it out. What she does in the box is to survive.
And that is for a prenate, a triumph.
Yes.
And it has been for her in a child and adult life too, a triumph just to survive.
Yeah.
You get a college degree, but you don't do anything with it. You just survive.
Yeah. Yep. So the next quote is, detachment is first enacted by the child within his or her early attachment relationships as a consequence of the caregiver's prolonged emotional or physical unavailability.
As we listen to Marilyn's story, we sure ought to be thinking, what could have called her out of the box? And that was merely, it's so simple. It would have been mother's beckoning call, which would have meant mother would have had to agree to be aware that she was in there and be alert and be interested and reach for her, so to speak.
I want to go to the next quote, which is, might it constitute a clever adaptive defense, a clever adaptive defense for the prenate to simply leave the scene, to dissociate?
It makes perfectly good sense when you think about it from the baby's point of view.
Yeah.
The problem with so many defenses in early life, including in prenatal life, however, is that when the need for the defense is gone, we often don't stop using it.
Yeah.
We sort of forget to notice that it's no longer useful, and we just keep doing it anyway.
Yeah. Of course, as if you have control over it, because of course the problem is as you're developing as a prenate, as you're developing from the very beginning, it's a biological reaction which has hormones connected to it and all these other elements that are biological that makes it very difficult. Okay, if I have to be on guard all the time in utero to survive, and I develop that way, then I'm going to be on guard from there on out, and it's not an easy thing to break that down. It's not impossible, but it really is very, very difficult.
And by the way, no therapist is going to talk Marilyn or anybody like her out of that defense. That's not the therapy that will ever work.
How do you mean? Talk a little more about that.
To convince her that it's no longer useful. Don't you see? You have so many possibilities, Marilyn. My goodness, you've got the rest of your life in front of you. You should try this or join this club or eat better or something. And all that is true, but it is not going to encourage the 50-year-old sitting in front of me who is essentially still a baby. That won't encourage her to give up a defense that has worked all of her life. Another part of the picture here that's dreadful to think about, and we haven't even had the clinical methods to be able to think about them until maybe the last 2 decades, because we didn't really know how to measure attachment. The other feature is the baby in that intrauterine environment where the mother is withdrawn becomes a different kind of baby than she would have otherwise become. Forget the box, that's just a defense. Her basic structure is going to be different.
Yeah.
The way she will approach relationships is going to be different. Now, picture her adoptive mother waiting in the wings, arms outstretched. She gets a baby that she was not likely prepared for. A baby that may be listless or self-withdrawn, or maybe hyperactive, but it certainly is not the baby that she could have been. And we now have the tools to evaluate, for example, the attachment style, so to speak, the state of mind regarding attachment of adoptive mothers, enough to know this mother will do very badly with a Marilyn. She might do very well with a different kind of baby, including another baby whose mother withdrew from her. It's just all about the match. But we now know that some of the failures in adoptive placement are not the fault of either the baby or the adoptive parent, but of some things that happened in utero that made the baby a different kind of baby and not a very good match for this adoptive mother.
Yeah, and you were talking mothers who were able to coherently describe their own childhood attachment experiences were more likely to be able to make sense of their children's behavior. And that seemed particularly true. I hate to go to another chapter, I don't want to do that, but the chapter where all the effort of the woman who beat her children until she was able to get past her own dissociative responses to things and see how badly she was hurt as a child, what it was like to admit that I've been hurt. Then she was able to see that she was hurting someone else, and then it stopped almost automatically. You want to speak to that a little bit, the ability to empathize about your own pain, then being able to be there for others?
Well, let's start with adoptive moms who can do it. I don't think they're better adoptive moms, and they're also, this is very important, they're also not adoptive moms who had a great attachment experience necessarily, but rather they are adoptive moms who know what their attachment experience was and can describe it coherently. They might say, my dad was a drunk and it was very hard, but my grandma used to come by and hug me and hold me, and that was the salvation for me. Wow. That's a coherent narrative. And that woman, if she becomes an adoptive mom, will be able to put up with a lot of pushback from an adoptee and not give up.
Wow, this is just, I have my issues with therapy, and a lot of therapists, particularly when they don't institute the idea that they don't know what's going on, that they are as vulnerable as the patient, they're walking. But I think it does make clear how important it is to know thyself. It's so important to know the truth about who you are, the good stuff and the bad stuff. To be able to, that seems really important. That doesn't matter what your life is like, but if you can see it, uncover it, then you can be there for somebody else who's as bewildered as you, in the process.
It's a very dangerous territory to go in, but let's just delicately take one step into it.
Okay.
What you just said applies also to any therapist that the adoptive mother or anybody in the whole system turns to, because if that person has his or her own defenses about attachment, then they will do the classic thing, which is turn to diagnostic categories.
Yeah.
And the adoptive family may find relief in that. Now I know why this kid has been crying ever since he came. He's a blankety blank. It will make them feel better, but it won't be true, and it won't ultimately help.
But the problem is, you must be, as you say in that opening thing I quoted, you must be curious and being able to be bewildered, and be a partner in that bewilderment to find the nuances of what is really going on here.
I hate to reach so far out on the limb, but frankly, diagnostic categories were created to reduce therapist bewilderment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, and because who goes into, I'll admit it myself. Why did I become a practitioner in this? I was lost. totally lost. And I was a patient for a long, long time, and I think it's been very valuable to face all that. Then you can be there for other people in pain, which is what you really want is that's what that child that's being adopted, it may be adopted, or that's a surrogate needs, is just the presence of
It's what the birth mother needed.
Yes, yes.
Someone to not shame her, to take her under their arm and love her, and not just teach her how to talk to the baby, but talk to her so she feels like talking to the baby.
Well, let's go back to some quotes about the biological mother. Let's go back to her. Let's go back to that 16, 17, 8. Let's just go to that example of being 16, 15 years old in high school or whatever, and just think about what it's like to be an adoptive mother and all the labels and everything else that other people attach to it and that you attach to itself. You said, thus was born the old tradition of discouraging the first mother, that's the biological mother, discouraging the biological mother from holding her baby after birth. The first mother may find herself surrounded by grown-ups who seem terrified that she will change her mind if she sees or holds her baby, or even if she is allowed to feel her grief openly.
And you might be shocked to know that even in this day and age, there aren't that many people in the adoption field who have gotten rid of that fear. I think I saw a name in the audience here tonight, that one of them is here, a woman from Los Angeles who stunned audiences 25 years ago by saying, if the birth mother changes her mind, we shouldn't be shocked, we shouldn't be horrified, and we should support her. She has a right.
More than that, it's miraculous, and it's not being dissociated. It's sort of realizing that, and the bravery of going, I don't care what everyone around me thinks I should do. Very hard for a 16, 17-year-old girl who, got pregnant, whatever went on, it was all these kinds of things. And I think I want to explore grief a little bit later. And actually, Raylene shared a story about that, which I thought was really important to get to. But I want to go to one other quote. All religions have rites of passage to mourn the loss of a child when it is through death. And the mourning is a shared experience. But there are no rites that accompany the placement of a child.
Rites, R-I-T-E-S, yes.
Yes. Which there should be. I mean,
we have a little study group that's been meeting for the last 2 years with the express purpose of seeing if we can come up with some rituals that would make sense for the transition.
Yeah. And those rituals are not necessarily going to free you from grief, but they're going to allow you to process it, and to process it with others. The other thing, going back to something you talk about in the chapter, both for the mother, but also for something that this unborn child is experiencing, is, let me see if this is the best. Yeah, let me just quote her. Her mom felt, this is Marilyn's, her mom felt lonely and without resources, so-called. She had to build defenses against the terror aroused by being young and pregnant, but also against grief over the anticipated loss of her child that may have threatened to overwhelm her. So this concept of anticipating grief, anticipatory grief, you want to speak to that as a piece of the challenge?
Oh, it's a profound thing that we give no opportunity whatsoever, no sanction for the birth mother to even have grief. So when she discovers that she's sad or has moments of ambivalence about relinquishing the baby, and if she tells anybody, they will quickly try to talk her out of that and never even go with her to the kneeling place of grief. Yeah. It's just not something she's allowed to have or supposed to have.
What do you think happens to that grief, that unresolved, that buried grief, as Bessel talks about, the body keeps the score? What do you feel about what happens to that grief if it's never addressed in that mother, as well as in the baby, but in the mother?
Well, the most classic thing is another baby, as soon as possible.
Which is not so great for a baby being a replacement baby. No, it's a...
Even being given sometimes the name of the lost baby.
Yeah. Almost as if that baby died without it being addressed. So it just gets buried deeper and deeper and deeper. I wonder, and I'll throw out the kind of thing that people go, you're crazy about, which is, does it turn into disease? Does it late in life turn into illness? Or in the case of Marilyn, certainly, which is a whole different thing, it's not exactly right, but how it diminishes life.
No, it doesn't lead to disease, but might it result in disease for a particular person? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what kind? It would be the autoimmune.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that I've seen a lot of our birth mothers do later in life, and I think specifically of a woman who wrote quite a bit about it in Florida, LaVon Stifler, who talked about the fact that she started turning to stone. She had kidney stones. She literally got arthritis in her hands where she couldn't move her fingers. She realized that she was becoming Lot, the woman who turned to stone, because she dared to look at something she shouldn't. And I have since met other women who have described it in that perspective. So I wanted to just share that.
Let's make sure we remember what the last part of Jern said. She looked at something she shouldn't. That's such an amazing description of the anticipatory grief.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's so sad is oftentimes the family is so ashamed by having a pregnant child. You have to protect the family, you have to protect the family, you have the reputation, and people will die for their families. They will sacrifice themselves for their families. They will sacrifice their own instincts, their mothering instincts, at great peril to everybody, even the family, everybody, it seems to me. And it doesn't go away, as Gabor Mate talks about. If you don't process it in this generation, it goes on to the next generation and the next generation.
We're talking right now about the grief that seems so obvious to us that a mother who's placing her baby for adoption would have, and her right to that grief. But in the situation of surrogacy, this is pre-planned. The mother knows what she's getting into. She's not planning to keep the baby. She's planning to give the baby to, in the case of an open surrogacy, which many are, she even maybe knows the family that the baby's going to. And usually in the cases of surrogacy, these are people who desperately want a baby and they have the means to provide for a surrogacy. So the friend of mine who's a medical professional who was a surrogate mother, after the baby, it was a beautiful pregnancy. It was a beautiful relinquishment up to the birth family. And during this pregnancy, she happened to learn about prenatal bonding through our association. And she told me she wasn't planning to bond with the baby because of her understanding that she wanted not to interfere with the bonding with the biological mother whose zygote she was carrying. And but once she learned about the importance of connecting with the baby and letting the baby know the story of why she was carrying this baby and who the intended parents were, she did have a really lovely bond with this baby. But afterwards, she began to have anxiety attacks that were totally unexpected. And what we talked about was the fact that although her brain knew that the baby was in good care, her body was not used to not having the baby that had been carried in her own womb. And that perhaps there was some kind of a biological reaction to not breastfeeding, not holding the baby, but it was completely unanticipated. And I think there's room here for us to anticipate a unexpected grief or anxiety after a surrogacy, as well as after an adoption.
Without for a moment pathologizing surrogacy.
But I think there's something else that goes on here. As long as we are robots, as long as we are just material robots, then we can do things without having feelings. But if we are actually human, and we are, if we are actually fully human, if we are a man or a woman that really is a feeling human being, then of course grief is there and should almost be honored as a human response to even giving a gift. And I think, Raylene, you and I have talked about it, and what a gift to the adopted child to know that my mother grieved over losing me. I mean, you can't even begin to, if you could tell every adopted child, your mother was the best situation she could come up with, whatever it was, but she grieved, because she did. It was just all unconscious and buried, which is, we are human beings. Sorry, that's the inconvenient truth.
No, this is not a real life example, but it's interesting how a film can even be ahead of its time. I don't know if anybody remembers the show Friends, when Phoebe was carrying triplets for her brother, and she was a surrogate mother. And in a very medically unrealistic situation, she has, before the implantation, the 3 little dishes there, and she talks to them and tells them that she's going to be carrying them for her brother, and that she's looking forward to that experience. And then after these 3 triplets are born at term, vaginally, she's left alone with them to say goodbye, and to tell them how much she will miss them, and how honored she was to carry them. And although it wasn't medically accurate, it was a beautiful demonstration of what could happen. And this was in the 90s, 80s. It was way ahead of its time.
Why is it not medically accurate? I mean, psychologically it's accurate.
Well, psychologically, yes, but triplets are typically born.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, of course.
And they would never.
No,
as a neonatologist, I'm thinking how unreasonable this actually is, only from a medical standpoint. I love the psychological.
I want to get that clip. I want to get that clip as a filmmaker and get it out there, because I think
we could probably do that. We could probably do that.
Yeah.
Can I intrude just for 1 second? I just want to make very, very sure that we don't pathologize either the birth mother in adoption or the surrogacy arrangement. Right. And I'll go 1 step further and say, I think it's perfectly reasonable for two, let's just say 2 women, to make a deal together, to make an agreement together, and be pretty sure they can get away with it. And the deal would go something like, you carry my baby, and when you're done carrying it, you give it to me, and I'll be really, really grateful, and we'll all be happy. And I think that's not an unreasonable, on the face of it, deal to make. It's
as long as the baby is part of the agreement, and not so much as long as the baby's informed.
Well, you didn't let me finish. Yes. Okay. There are 2 problems here. One is that the surrogate mother may be surprised when she can't quite fulfill her end of the bargain, because look what she went and did. Yeah. She went and got feelings about that baby inside of her. She accidentally talked to it at midnight one night in the bathroom, and whoops, what happened? And then it gets kind of messy. So that I understand. The other problem is what Raylene just mentioned, and that's the problem we've not even addressed at all until just very, very recently. And that is in the mix of this, with both birth mothers and surrogate mothers, is a baby waiting to be acknowledged.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just tell the baby. I love what Catherine Lightfoot has said in the draft of the bond. As long as we are authentic with the baby and tell them what our experience is, then it really doesn't so much matter what is happening. We are acknowledging the situation, we are explaining it, we are assuring the baby of their safety, and at least our efforts to keep them safe, and acknowledging them. They just want to be acknowledged, like any of us do.
If I could go back to Marilyn, this box, did it turn out to be the womb, the uterus?
In a metaphorical sense, yes, I think it absolutely did. Yes.
So was she aware that that was?
She came back for the 2nd session, having already concluded that, it wasn't conscious before, and sort of treated it as a fait accompli thereafter, like, oh, well, any dummy would know that. Of course, I was talking about the uterus.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Then you could work on the trauma in utero trauma or not, was what I wondered.
Well, it was pretty late 5 decades had passed, so we couldn't do traditional psychoanalytic work, or I didn't choose to anyway. But she was ready to do some other kind of work, and some of it included, to my great surprise, identification with proud and brave women. And in that search, came upon this information that her grandmother had been a snow Cherokee, had walked the Trail of Tears across southern Illinois, and with other women in the dead of winter had escaped up into the hills and hidden out in caves and gotten away from the forced movement to Oklahoma. And she found that absolutely fascinating, probably never even noticing right off the bat what she had said. I found another woman who hid in a box and survived. So that was how her growth happened.
That was the maternal grandmother.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So she was in the maternal grandmother as an egg when this happened. Wow. Thank you.
Bless your heart. I had not thought of that till you just started saying it.
Yeah.
I forgot all about that fact.
My name is Zara Phillips. I'm an adoptee and a speaker, and I've been in this world for about, 20 years on my own journey around adoption and hearing so much within the community. And it's wonderful to hear you speaking about a topic actually that I have known for years. I'm also a mother of 3 natural children. You talked about matching. And if it was the right match, I absolutely agree with you. We are not the same as we would be, because our mothers, it's not the case that our mothers don't want us. Many of our mothers want us, but they're not giving the support to keep us. So when you talk about the matching, if we were slightly different, it's a match. It's never the right match for an adoptee. It's just never the right match. And no matter how much love our parents give us and how much you think, just by acknowledging us, we're going to be okay, it's not okay. That's my experience. And the trauma that we live with, to me, surrogacy is abuse. It is child abuse. To purposely create a baby and give it to we're not gifts to be given away. And I feel really strongly about this. And more education and to listen to adopted people that live it. That, we're not always heard because we become very emotional and we're called the angry adoptee, the this, the that. But we're the ones that feel it in ourselves, that live it. I would never wish it upon anybody. So creating and saying, oh, but we're just going to tell the baby, we love you so much that we're going to give you to somebody else. That makes no sense to us, because it's like you said at the beginning, it's hard, it's inconvenient. We are reacting normally to an abnormal situation. It is not normal to give a baby to a stranger and expect us to adapt. It is just not normal. Sorry, I will be quiet, but
please don't. And maybe you could put, if any of your writings are available in any way, if you could put an address on the chat.
Yes.
I won't soon forget your crisp statement. It's never the right match.
And why people still don't get that babies have feelings around being given up. It's like, what? Isn't that the most obvious thing in the world? And people are still like, we don't understand why sorry, anyway.
No, Zara, I also agree. And I think we want to have and I think we have to have a dialogue around this. One of the things that's gone on for me is, what do you do with the fact that surrogacy is existing in the world? And I also feel instinctively what you're saying about this. We need to be there as practitioners to make this as good a situation as we can. And the only other thing I would add to it is, I am not an adoptee, but my experience in the womb of my mother was dreadful. And I know, and so, which is not to take away from the incredible dislocation that takes place when you leave planet Venus and then go to planet Pluto, which is what adoption and surrogacy is like. But I think that that there's so much damage that can go on in the womb that we have to address it as best we can, living in the real world. But we need your dialogue. It's critical that your dialogue is there to speak that truth, and it needs to be defended in a major way, because we got to figure our way through this as best we can, even as we live in the real world.
Openness. There has to be openness.
Yeah, yeah.
A child has to know all the parents involved. There cannot be, I'm from the closed adoption, you know, that's my generation, the closed adoption. In England, they now say it's emotional torture. You don't put people with strangers and say, adapt. We're not going to tell you anything about your history, adapt. They're recognizing it. And America are beginning to recognize stuff too, but surrogacy, they show up at our conferences. Sperm donor, you know, adults that were created by sperm donor surrogacy are showing up at our conferences because they don't know where else to go. Right. I know one girl that started actually a sperm donor support group. So just so you all know, they find us. Our communities are all joining together because it's the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, and we have to address it and be scientists about this and work our way through this as best as we can in a real world. That's part of the issue.
Well, thank you for doing this. This is a great platform. So I'll write my stuff in here. Thanks.
Okay, great. Any other questions?
Yes, thanks, Zara. A lot of appreciation for you in the chat. And next up we have Ruth. Ruth, would you like to have something to say?
Hi, how are you? I'm an adoptee given up at birth, and I spent 9 years in foster care. And when listening to you guys, I really do also appreciate this talk because we really need to talk about it. With adoption comes not only, you know, that day that we're given up, that very first couple hours of our lives that are just so precious, and our bodies get filled with all these hormones of panic and fight and flight, and we've got nowhere to go. It's about survival. It becomes about just our basic survival. And I feel like people think that we're interchangeable, that babies can just be interchangeable. In my adoption story, after the 9 years in foster care and being bounced around, I got adopted by white parents. And that adds another layer on, you know, to your identity, to who you are, to you know, to the story of how I got to this spot. Adoption is not easy, and it changes us on our very first day of life, in those first precious hours when we're not given to our mother and latched on and hear her heartbeat and her voice. It changes us that very minute. You know, the change in utero, for those mothers who definitely aren't trying to attach to the baby, or those that were trying to attach to their baby to try to give them some message that, you know, I didn't want to give you up. But whatever it is, it truly changes our lives and alters who we are and who we could have been. There's just no getting around it. We are not gifts. There is no wrapping up just because you can't have children. You know, here's another one for you. I don't have all the answers for adoption. I really don't. But I appreciate that we are talking about it now and that people are starting to listen to the adoptee voice, because we have to pay for a contract that somebody else made, a decision other people made. And then we're made to feel like, well, that's not that big a deal. And it is a big deal. It truly is. And I want us to, you know, hold those women and men in that space that, you know, fertility is their issue. You're not guaranteed a baby. You're just not. And you're not guaranteed to be parents.
I think all of that's true. I want to go over one thing you said and just deconstruct it a little bit. It changes us. The idea that it changes us, no matter what. I would argue that the agency that an unborn child has of having horrible trauma hit them, that the biology, both psychologically and the biology, makes the decision to do the changing. That there's something, no matter how bad the result is, if I can be clear about this, that one suffers. And the reason I bring this up is that we do the changing. I was not adopted, but I had my own issues. But it's like we as an organism have in us the ability to rework ourselves so we can survive. We can survive. And what I have come to see is that because we have that, because it's in us, we can now adjust and rework ourselves into being healthy human beings, and being profoundly valuable in the world. The argument, the things that you are talking about that are adopted, to be able to take what's in you and articulate this to the world so we can make these adjustments. That's what we should be able to do now, because I think at the core of us, we are profoundly healthy in an unhealthy world.
So I hear what you're saying, but it's just not that easy for adopted people. And again, I am the adoptee. I am walking in these shoes every single day, and the non-adoptees just don't get it.
I think that's true. I think what we're trying to do here is all of us together, whatever our experience was, is how do we make the best of the circumstances that exist now? How do we be curious and open to it so that we can make things a little bit, so we can mitigate some of this, and over generations maybe really clear this up. But it's not going to happen overnight. And I think, Michael, what you've been doing, you've been in the field for this for so long. How do you deal with this angst that's coming up here? How do you address that and make it as palatable or as reasonable as possible under pretty horrific circumstances? I want to read something here that again you wrote towards the end of that chapter. At the most practical and immediate level, can we support the very connections between first mother and her baby that she may, in self-defense, wish to avoid? Can we help her move toward her baby, even in the face of her knowing that she will soon be moving away from that same baby? Can we support her saying hello, while also supporting the grief that will be part and parcel of her saying goodbye? In the process, can we open the way to a new perinatal life for babies headed for adoption? Because in some cases, that's just going to happen. Finally, can we open the way to a new postnatal life with the adoptive family, which we were just talking about, one marked by readiness for attachment on both sides?
A very, very tall order, isn't it?
Yes, really is. Easy to say, and as this is showing today, hard to navigate.
And I wrote it that way, the way I did, to make sure that nobody could treat lightly the size of the burden. We can't just think we can start talking to birth moms and be kind to them, and they'll suddenly just gush open with feeling and a willingness and ability to acknowledge the baby and to mourn the loss and so on. Many birth moms don't, at least at the conscious level, don't want to think about any of this. They don't want to go there. They're glad when everyone around them says, just think about something else and don't think about your baby. So it's a delicate thing when we invite a birth mom, for example, to consider the baby inside her.
Yeah. But I think what is hopeful is that human beings, whatever we think of human beings, need to attach. We are organisms that need to bond. And when it doesn't happen, it's a nightmare. And when it does happen, life psychologically and biologically becomes a really positive and contributory experience. I mean, you can contribute to other people. I don't know, that's what I have found in my own trauma, is that, I really need to be with other people. I need to be hugged. I need that even now, and I needed it back when I was younger. And if we can somehow keep addressing that in all of this, it seems to be the deepest message is just bond. We're not robots, coming back to that. But it's not an easy thing. But you've been in it, so I need you to guide us a little bit in what we've walked into a little bit, Michael, with your poetry and your science, because I'm in way beyond my depths at the moment.
We all just walk around dragging our story behind us best we can. Some of us lift it up higher and carry it in a different part of our body, but we all drag it around one way or another. I'll probably die afraid of being left because my mom was 16 and clearly did not want me, but decided to have me, but made a deal with me, which was, if I be a really, really, really good boy, she'll love me. And so I did. That was the deal, and I fulfilled it. You ask her to this day, she's still alive.
Wow.
You ask her to this day, when I was diaper changed or toilet trained or on the bottle or off the bottle, she'll tell you just ridiculous stories about my performance, revealing therein that that's what was most important to her. That'll always be important to me. I'll never quite get over that, but I've managed to find a way to carry it and even be loved for just who I am, not what I can do.
But now there are voices speaking to this, that you're allowed to be ambivalent as a mother. We do not want to we do not want to demonize any of this stuff, but we have to deal with the consequences of it.
You know, I'm very profoundly moved by the sharing that's been happening with those who have been adopted, and I want to thank you for speaking up. Being an adoptee is something that those of us who have not had that experience can never fully understand. And I think that it's in a different way, similar to any trauma that happens to people. My father died when I was very young. It profoundly changed my life. It took me years to even realize that there was an impact on me. And once I did, it took me years to figure out what to do with it. And I'm sure I haven't completely figured it out myself yet, but it impacts so much of my life to have that early trauma. And so I just want to empathize or sympathize with all the different traumas that we have as young babies and young children and young adults, and realize that I think that suffering is part of our human experience. And as we have our own individual traumas and suffering, it can help us to relate in not exactly the same way, but just a shared experience of recovering and healing from whatever traumas happened to be a part of our chosen life, or unchosen, however we look at it. That's all I wanted to say. I wanted to thank those who had spoken up and let you know how moved I am by the things that you shared.
I think the most critical thing here is that we have this dialogue. We have these different points of view, and we allow all of them to be engaged with. And I'm so honored to be a part of this now in this webinar, so that we can keep ultimately, helping people, but also creating, programs and laws and things like that make this easier. And we do change the world. That's what we want to do ultimately. Is do our best to change the world while we're here. And I want to honor all the adopted people here who have a message that's so critical for so many other adopted people in the world that need to hear this. So I do say, write things, go on podcasts, be brave, talk about this stuff. And know that people, I find in my life, people are going to say, shut up, whatever, but don't. Go out there and honor your journey and teach us, which is what really Michael's sort of approach, I'm going on too long, but just Michael has been about that. We need to learn, those of us trying to do the best we can. Thank you, everybody. And
thank you.
Have a wonderful night. Thank you, Michael.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Wonderful to be with all of you.
You can all jump on for a minute and say something to Michael as he's leaving.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you,
Thank you,
Stephen.
Michael. Thank you so much.
Thanks, both of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks for in vitro. Great. I loved it. Everybody
Thank you,
watched in
appreciate it.
virtual. Great.
And buy his book.
Thank
Okay, very
Buy
good. Take care. Bye.